So for this first episode, I decided to talk you through a psychological theory that I find to be particularly relevant to the times that we're living currently, and hopefully you will see why I think it's relevant. Hopefully I will make that clear to you. And the psychological theory that I'm going to talk about is TMT, aka Terror Management Theory. And what is TMT all about? Basically, human beings are self-aware. We are aware of our existence and we have the ability to make sense of our existence and to be rational about it. And this is kind of like what sets us apart from all other animals. We can think and therefore we exist. And we usually see this as a quality. I believe this is the main reason why a lot of us think that we are superior to other species. And I guess that intellectually that might be true, but there's also drawbacks in being aware of the fact that we exist, which is the fact that we also know we can stop existing and that could happen at any point in time. We know that it exists and that for as long as death exists, we will stop existing someday. But we don't know when that's going to be or how. We don't know how it will feel because we will only get to experience death once. It will happen to us one time in the course of our lives, and therefore there's no one who's capable of surviving through this experience and tell us what it feels like. So we come to fear it. We come to fear because we don't know it. And in this sense, I think being self-aware actually presents itself as a disadvantage. I can imagine that it must be way easier for a rabbit to live a happy life because he does not wonder about whether he will ever stop living. He does not know what living means, so he lives as if he's immortal because he does not think about death. Psychologically, that is. Genetically and biologically, he knows he's going to die, but mentally, he's not acquainted with the concept of death. But we are. And we have a tendency to fear the unknown, and we know very little about that. So we experience death anxiety, we experience death-related thoughts, and these can be terrifying, so we need to find a way to cope with them. Hence the name Terror Management Theory. How do we manage death anxiety? I mean, it's not like we're constantly haunted by death thoughts. They might come to us now and again, but for the most part, it is not something that is constantly in our minds. Well, actually, I think it is. I think it is constantly at the back of our minds, but we find ways of silencing that voice. And there's several ways of dealing with death anxiety. Religion is very helpful in this regard because it actually makes us think that death is not actually the end. We might still live in heaven when we die, or perhaps you might hold the belief that reincarnation is a thing. And so this is not the only life you will ever live. And this eases your death concerns. Death becomes less meaningful, less scary if it does not represent a true end to our existence. Now you might wonder how a non-religious person manages their death concerns if they do not believe in what I've just described. Well, they might lessen their anxiety about death by thinking of it symbolically. And this is very present in the Mexican culture, for instance. There is like a big focus on extending one's life by remembering them. That's what Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, is all about. So, yeah, you might die physically, but if people still remember you, then they're keeping you alive through their memory of who you were. Your body might have died, but psychologically, you are still present through them and in them. I believe that even if you are religious, you will probably act in ways which are very much in line with this belief that if you are remembered, then you are somehow getting around death. Nowadays, I believe the most shared coping strategy for death awareness is really thinking that living an honorable life, a meaningful life, a purposeful life, achieving happiness is the way to trick death. We think, okay, I recognize that I can die, but if I did something of value, if I lived my life to the fullest, then this makes it okay to die, because that was the whole point of living anyways. You don't need to live forever. You need to live until you've achieved your purpose. And this, I feel, creates a whole other type of anxiety for some, which is that of finding a purpose. And even though in practice I feel this is a very efficient strategy, at the same time, when we think of it theoretically, I don't see how or why it is so popular. Because you just get anxious over the fact that you need to find yourself a purpose for your life, so that you don't get anxious over death. So in reality, you're just replacing one type of anxiety for another kind of anxiety, but it somehow works. It's a paradox, because we are aware of our existence, but we need to find ways of coping with this knowledge. Our species is not sophisticated enough to be able to live with reality as it is without finding ways of tricking our minds and the way we think and feel about death. We really need to do this in order to be functional human beings, and we do it all the time. So much so that we're no longer aware that we're doing it. But every now and again, this fear becomes evident. And I believe the times we're living currently are the perfect example of this. This whole pandemic craziness only comes to make our fear of dying even more salient than it already is. And, I keep hearing everyone's been joking about the whole toilet roll shortage situation, and they say, why this? Why are we in panic buying mode? Well, it's actually not that surprising if we consider everything that I've said previously. Our levels of death thoughts have been rising up during the last months, and we're trying to find ways of keeping them down and under control, so we do what we can. And all we can do at the moment is avoiding to leave the house, which means buying more food than you would normally buy because, say, you usually do your groceries every week. Well, now you want to try and do it every month and so on, in case you need to isolate yourself or so. And we think that by doing this, we are decreasing our chances of getting COVID-19, and this in turn decreases our death anxiety. So we're basically trying to find ways of feeling in control when pretty much everything about this pandemic feels out of our control. And again, everything we feel about COVID-19 is pretty much how we feel about death. We don't know much about it, we don't know when we're going to get it, and if we do get it, will we make it through it or not? It's a lot of question marks, and this makes us anxious because we feel we don't know enough to keep it under control. So we do what we can and we buy toilet roll. Now, why toilet roll in specific? I don't know. I cannot put my finger on it, but I don't know. Maybe it's because it's accessible and expensive. I'm not too sure, but if there's something I learned through studying psychology, and this was actually the first thing I've learned at uni, is that human beings are not logical. We think we are. We think we're consistent and coherent, but in reality, that is not quite true. So it's not like we always make sense anyways. So we shouldn't really try to make sense of everything that we do. Also, I feel most of us haven't found our purpose yet, and this feeds back into the fear of dying. We cannot die just yet. We have not lived life to the fullest, otherwise we wouldn't be buying toilet paper like crazy. We're getting really affected by this pandemic because we haven't lived to such an extent where we're comfortable with thinking of death. But well, all of this to say that I feel it's helpful to know how we function, especially under times like these. I believe the foundation for every type of fear is lack of knowledge. So I think providing you with a bit more insight into how we work, even though that's still being studied, and I don't think it will ever not be studied. But hopefully by understanding ourselves better, you feel more comfortable with the way you act and the way you think. And just a little side note on this, I was only planning on talking about our awareness of our death, but even if you think about your awareness of your own existence, well, you have lived for as long as you've been born. Intellectually speaking, if you're a 22-year-old girl, then you know you've been living for 22 years. But if I ask you, for how long does it feel like you've been living? Now that's a different question. And I feel like most people will actually say a smaller number of years. When I was first asked this question, I remember saying, well, I don't really remember much from my childhood up until I was 6. There's not much I can recall, so I'd say it feels like I've been living for around 16 years. So I basically resorted to my memories, to my first memory, to be able to answer this question. But if you think about it, can you actually think of a time when you were not living? You can't, right? Because, I mean, if you can, then you're already dead, right? So in this sense, it actually feels like you've been living forever. Because even though you may not recall your whole life, you can definitely not recall one time when you were dead. So it actually feels like your life has been going forever. And I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but I just thought it would be interesting, and I wanted to end on a positive note too. Also, if you're interested in this topic and if you're also interested in reading international books, there is this Portuguese author, which is my favorite writer of all times. His name is Saramago. I'll spell it out for you, don't worry. So it's Saramago. And he has got this book called Death at Intervals. That's the English version. And basically, the story starts at the stroke of midnight at the 1st of January. And so on this day, no one dies. It's like death isn't a thing anymore for humans. And the writer reflects on how immortality would affect our world and how it would affect human beings on a personal level. And it really does make us think, is death really all that bad? So yeah, do yourselves a favor and read this book. For me, this kind of ideas and thoughts and wondering whether anyone has thought about these things too, is really what makes my life meaningful. So I guess it's my way of dealing with the dark side of consciousness. So yeah, this was my first episode. I'm not sure if the following ones will be this long or this short, but I do want to keep them short and sweet. I personally prefer shorter podcasts that don't take too much of my time. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for listening.